Early in the summer a few years ago, I started dating this girl whose mom worked at the local flea market. The girl, let's call her Tiffany, and I had been dating for a few months when she asked me if I would like to come help her work with her mom. I certainly didn't want to sacrifice one of my precious Saturday mornings to go work all day in a dusty flea market, but I really liked this girl, and to be perfectly honest, I wanted a little bit of action, so I decided to go. That's how I found myself on the way to this crap-hole flea market at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday. I really wish I had slept in. We opened her mom's store at 8, waited around for customers for a while, but when it got close to 10 and only one woman had showed a passing interest in the handmade ashtrays her mom was trying to sell, she told Tiffany and I that we could go take a look around the rest of the place. Tiffany and I walked for a little while, but we didn't find anything of interest. There was a movie store that had pretty much every movie you could think of. So did I at home, so there was no help there. Both of the bookstores were a bust, finding nothing interesting but some old Stephen King novels that I already owned and a crotchety old man who watched us like a hawk. Probably because we were some of them damn teenagers who, of course, would go out of our way to steal an old dusty book barely held together with spit and glue. We had meandered our way through most of the buildings when we came upon a small shop that was selling exclusive, rare, hard-to-find TV props, according to the very loud banner stretched across the top. "Want to go in?" I asked Tiffany. "Nah, I have to use the bathroom. You can go in, though." "Oh, fine. Make me go in the shady store by myself," I joked. "You'll be fine. Go." "Do I have to?" "Yes, you have to go inside. I'll be right back." She gave me a playful slap and walked away. As I walked into the dingy booth, the owner gave me a grim nod without a smile. I didn't really see anything of interest at first. They really did have some obscure stuff, such as old plush dolls from Rocco's Modern Life and Ren and Stimpy. There's also some old Pokemon playing cards. I'm not sure if that counted as rare TV props. It was still pretty cool. And even some of the old Nickelodeon-themed board games. I had several nice hits of nostalgia, but nothing really stuck out to me enough to make me want to buy it. I was about to walk out when the owner said, "Bud, got some more stuff in the back here if you want to see it." A few moments later, he came back with a box of assorted dolls and junk and dropped it carelessly on the counter. Ain't had a chance to pull them away yet, but you can have a look. I half-heartedly picked out a couple of them for politeness, but I really just wanted to get out of there. Pulled out a couple old Rugrats dolls and a Squidward doll that had an odd red stain on its head. I was about to say no thanks and put them back and get out of there when I saw something that hit me with such an intense blast of nostalgia that I almost fell over. It was a dirty white skull staring at me from the bottom of the box, with huge black eyes that were entirely too large for its head. Just as I had remembered. I reached down and picked him up, almost forgetting the entire world around me as I looked over the thing I had completely forgotten about until this very moment. The tan top hat and cape, made of some of the roughest leather I'd ever seen, was sewn up in the same crazy pattern I'd remembered so vividly from my childhood. As I rubbed some of the dirt off its body, noticing the feeling of a rough little bump on his hat and a leathery stitches holding together his clothing, I noticed that his jaw didn't open all the way. Instead, it barely opened, just a bit, and slid sideways from left to right, making an almost unpleasant grinding noise. Every detail was exactly as I remembered. "Well?" I jerked out of my stupor with a start. Looking stupidly at the owner, I used every ounce of intelligence I possessed to come up with a brilliant reply. "What?" "I said, are you going to buy it, or are you just going to stare there all day molesting it? Come on, kid, I want to go to lunch." Yeah, sure, I'll take it." There was no way I was letting this go. "Would you happen to know if this is, actually from the show?" "Kid," which I really wish he would stop calling me kid. Just because he was probably in his late 50s doesn't mean he can address me, a 26-year-old man, as a kid. "I don't even know what show that's from. All this crap is my brother's. He'd tell you that it's the real deal, but I just want to get rid of it." "I mean, I hate to be a bother, but is there any way that I could, get in contact with him? This show doesn't even... I just need to know if this is real." "Can't. Dead. 3 months now. The doll is $10. Take it or leave it." I handed the rude owner the cash and left the shop with the doll, deep in thought. There's no way this doll should even exist. the show didn't exist. There was no way it did. I dreamt it all, hadn't I? All that screaming. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even see Tiffany until she was almost right in my face. Oh, hey. Hey, did you actually find something in that shady store? Yeah. I told her a bit about the doll. She didn't recognize it, but I really didn't expect her to. Our conversation quickly turned to other things, such as the creepy old lady she had encountered in the bathroom who had taken up 15 minutes of her time asking way too personal questions. We finished out the day, and her mom thanked us for the help, and we spent the day together. For those who are curious, I did not succeed at any action, but that's inconsequential to the story. Anyway, that night when I got back to my apartment, I pulled out the doll, something I'd been dying to do all day but had avoided so I didn't look like a freak, and gave it a closer look. I couldn't get over how genuine the cape felt. I loved the feeling of running my fingers over it, enjoying the smooth, yet rough texture of the stitches. The top hat was removable, and the glass eyes were indeed made of a really thick glass. It was all as I had remembered. I was in utter shock, even still. How did this exist? I sat on my couch and began thinking about the show. Candle Cove. Gosh. I hadn't thought about that show in easily 15, maybe 20 years. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7 when it ran. I only remember it being on for a couple of months before it got canceled. I remember greatly enjoying it at the time, though. I'd come home from school, always so excited, and always making my mom turn the TV to channel 58 and watch it. I remember sitting on the floor, way too close to the TV, watching her turn the dial with the finger that had a mole on it, always the same one every time. Yeah, I'm old enough that the TVs of my childhood still had manual dials instead of a remote, so sue me. I chuckled to myself. I hadn't thought about any of that for so long. I missed my mom, thinking about on it now. She'd passed away about 5 years ago from skin cancer, and it hit me really hard. She'd been such a big influence in my life. She'd always tell me about what an imagination I had, and that she just knew it would take me far. I wish she had lived long enough to see me graduate college and land a small job at an independent film company where I edited movies. It certainly didn't make me famous or anything, but it paid well, and I was responsible for some of the better editing in many different films, some of which I knew she would have loved to watch. I miss her terribly. I missed how when I was sad she'd pretend to draw on my face, and I'd always watch the mole on her finger as it traced my face, because I thought her freckle mountain, as I called it, was pretty cool. I missed the way she'd chuckle and shake her head as I watched the show, remarking on what a big imagination I had with my little pirate thing. I'd always wondered exactly what she meant, but the older I got, the more I realized I must have all been in my imagination. The whole thing. The entire show must have been me thinking too much, or something. Because there was no way that could have been aired in an episode. One with all the screaming. All the characters screaming bloody murder and jumping and flailing. I remember vividly the horrible feelings I got from that episode. And even as a child, I thought it was strange. Things like that don't get aired today, much less all the way back in 71. I must have been rubbing my finger over the doll's face again, and hadn't noticed what I was doing until I felt a strong pinch. I gasped and looked down and quickly pulled my finger out of the doll's mouth. What the hell? Why did that hurt so bad? The teeth weren't sharp or anything. I hadn't even realized I'd put my finger in there. I must have bumped his jaw or something and pinched myself. I sighed and shook my head at my own foolishness, and went back to looking at the doll that was responsible for so many of my childhood nightmares. As I examined the doll's mouth, I found myself wondering why it only moved side to side. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more the memories came flooding back. The laughingstock. Gosh. This old piece of shit pirate ship that was always so close to falling apart. The Edwin voice it had, telling the pirates they had to go inside someplace and face the danger. Usually the skin taker, whose images I held in my very hand. I remember Janice, the little girl from the show, asking the skin taker why it moved his head like that. Gosh. What was it that he said? I strained every muscle in my memory until I suddenly got goosebumps when the phrase drifted through my mind, leaving icy trails of fear running down my back. To grind your skin. I mean, it was such a cheesy thing to say, but there was nothing cheesy about the way he had glared so silently into the camera with his evil black eyes, almost challenging someone to defy him. Shaking off my childish fears, I tossed the doll on a coffee table and went to go take a shower. I needed to clear my head, but the entire time in the shower, my thoughts only wandered more and more. I started remembering more about the final episode that had aired, and the way all the puppets and Janice had screamed and thrashed and shook so violently. There hadn't even been a plot or anything. The entire episode had consisted of nothing but characters screaming and crying. It was chaotic and traumatic. I remember how I had started to cry and my mom had run in from the other room asking me what was wrong. And I told her through my tears how Janice was crying and no one was helping her. My mom just turned off the TV and picked me up to make me feel better. Then she went and put me to bed, tracing my face with the finger, till I fell asleep in terrible nightmares all night long about the skin taker chasing me and screaming incessantly. All these thoughts ran through my mind, and even though my shower water was pretty hot, I still had chills all over my body. It didn't help that when I turned off the water, I could hear my TV was on. I froze. I knew I hadn't left my TV on. I hadn't even turned it on since I got home. I'd simply walked through the door and sat on my couch, looked at the doll, and I knew I'd never touched the remote or the TV. I slowly got out of the shower, dried off, listening carefully to the sounds coming from my living room. I couldn't believe my ears. Calliope music. The last set of memories came with a refreshing course of nostalgia. My mother's finger, the one with the mole that had always comforted me so, turned the dial to the station with all the static. The static always had static, I remembered that, until 4 o'clock, when Candle Cove came on. There was never anything else but static. When Candle Cove came on through the Calliope music, ridiculously happy, start to bleed through the static, slow and distorted at first, but speeding up and becoming more bouncy as the picture cleared, and Pirate Percy and his friends greeted Janice to a new day of adventures. Now I suspected that it had always been static, even when the show was on. Maybe that was why my mother had shaken her head and laughed at me. If it had always been static, where did the doll come from? How did it even exist if the show didn't? I was so confused, and the stupid, catchy music coming from my living room was not only making me more confused, it was starting to kind of creep me out. Shaking off my thoughts, I opened the door and heard the tail end of the sentence spoken in a voice that sounded remarkably like Edwin. "Go inside!" it was saying. I stepped out and slowly walked into the living room. My hallway was ridiculously long, and it only served to increase my tension. But just as I rounded the corner, the TV turned to static. As the only light in the room was the whiteness from the static on the TV, I got really creeped out. I rushed to the lamp, flicked it on, and saw the doll was exactly where I'd left it, right on top of the remote. I sighed in relief and shook my head in embarrassment. It all made sense now. I'd simply thrown the doll on the remote, and the force of his impact had turned on the TV. I simply hadn't noticed because my TV takes forever to turn on, and by the time it had, I was in the bathroom. It had been staticky the entire time, and it simply my confused, slightly disturbed thoughts and emotions had projected the noises I heard in my brain. I really needed to get some sleep. I knew it wasn't a good idea to wake up at the crack of dawn to go to the flea market. I could have slept in all day and avoided this whole mess. There'd be no questions about where the doll came from, or if this stupid thing had even existed, or what all my disjointed, confused memories were trying to tell me. Everything would have been alright if I just slept in. Sound advice for life. Always sleep in. This is all stuff I try to tell myself to relieve the creepy feelings I'd had. It almost worked. It almost worked. My heartbeat finally slowed and my blood pressure was normal. The goosebumps were finally gone, and all the things I told myself had made me feel better. My justifications and explanations had almost made me feel better. That is until I picked up the doll, started absent-mindedly running my fingers over it again. I started playing with the funny little bump that was on the top hat again, and I remember being extremely comforted. The bad feelings suddenly went away. I felt much better. All was well. The show probably had simply existed in another format, and since I was so young, my confused mind had simply combined my memories with something else and projected them over the show, giving me all these confused feelings. I'd simply get dressed, get on my computer, look up the show, and put all this crap to rest. Maybe I'd even throw away the doll. It would be for the best. I shouldn't have even bought it. Now that I had, $10 was not too much of a price to pay for some peace of mind. I got up to put the doll in the trash. The towel wrapped around my waist started to unravel. I reached to grab it and dropped the doll. Tonight was just not my night. I bent down to pick up the doll and its top hat, which had fallen off. It was then that I got a good look at the hat, and it was separate from the menacing black eye that demanded all my attention before. I'd been playing with the funny little bump on the hat, and I had an intense feeling, a sense of comfort as I did. When I looked at the top hat, I realized with a sudden burst of recognition and fear what my memories had been trying to tell me. I realized what was so funny about that little bump that had given me comfort. It was the same bump that I had stared at endlessly as a child, in times of happiness, sadness, pain, and fear. A funny little bump. It was my mother's mole.